Hello and welcome. This is the second video sort of from Education for Ministry in the Diocese of the Rio Grande. I'm Michael Drinkwater, the Diocesan Coordinator for Education for Ministry and the Rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Alamogordo. And with me today, I have my friend Justin. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone, nice to be here. I'm Justin Price, and I'm a member of St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church in Albuquerque. And St. Michael and All Angels started recently an EFM program. I think there hadn't been one going on at St. Michael's for several years. I know they've had them in the past, but I don't think recently, not real recently anyway. And it was suggested to me because I had an interest in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, which I had really not read very much. And so that was what they'd be covering in this particular class. And so it was the possibility of doing that was really attractive to me. So that's how I got involved in the EFM. And our facilitator is Camille Flores. Have I got her last name right? Flores, yeah, who's from Santa Fe and comes down from Santa Fe, or did when we started with the start of the COVID epidemic. We had to go online, which made, I think, the theological reflection process particularly challenging because Camille was used to doing it with people all in the room at the same time. Having to do it online, I think, made it more difficult for her and perhaps for us.
Yeah, but doing it online did give us an opportunity to. It gave me the idea to do some things like this, where we could do some collaboration across distance, and so we're trying to find we're all trying to find the opportunities in the crisis, and I'm grateful to Justin and for the ministry of Camille in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. So what's our starting point for our reflection today?
Well, let's see. This takes us back to perhaps June of this year, and for the last I don't know, couple of years perhaps. I've been intrigued by the idea of composing musical settings for psalms. And so I've written 2 or 3 others, and some of them have been performed by the choirs at St. Michael's in Albuquerque. And I was particularly intrigued by psalms that are a little bit offbeat or perhaps even off-putting, psalms that other people haven't set because they didn't have that kind of big mythological resonance that I mean, out of the depths I cry unto thee, O Lord.
Right, or I lift up my eyes unto the hills.
Lift up my eyes, the mountains, and all those kinds of great moments, that lend themselves to musical setting very powerfully. But there are a lot of psalms that we don't have settings for in our hymnal. At St. Michael's, we use the Gather, and sometimes there just isn't one, and so our director has to go and dig up something, and oftentimes what he digs up is not too satisfying, and we don't necessarily know how to sing it, and I don't know. So anyway, the need to set some of these more unusual psalms presented itself to me, and so that's kind of what's been going on. Well, the one that I was working on back in June was 133. And it was just right at that time that Camille said, okay, you guys, we're going to read this section on theological reflection, and then we want you to do a theological reflection on something that happens, because we got to get into this. It was like, we were being held back, I think, by having to use the Zoom and all that. And so she said, we just got to do it. So I was there, I'd read the material. I liked the material. I thought it was really good, and so then I thought about, well, what's the most important thing that's happened to me in the last week? And it was pretty clear it was finishing my setting of Psalm 133. And interestingly, I didn't know this at the time, but Psalm 133 is kind of a theme psalm for education for ministry, for EFM. Now, had no idea about this, but so when Camille discovered that it was Psalm 133, that was an extra excitement for her.
Yeah.
That this could all fit together in that way. So this is what I did. I was using questions, and I've actually gone through the book and tried to find the questions, but I can't find them anymore. But I can just tell from what I wrote down what the question was. So the first part was to identify, and it's based upon an experience. It comes from a personal experience, and they have 4 steps: identify, explore, connect, and apply. And so the first one was identify. And I'm sure that in the questions they said, talk about it now like it's an objective thing, like it's outside yourself. Talk about it as though you're watching it go on. And so
which is always a really challenging thing. I remember when I was working with new students at the cathedral in Albuquerque in EFM, that sort of talking about your own experience from this detached, objective, third person view can be a really there are several really good types of theological reflection which begin with experience, but they're very rarely done because it's challenging from the beginning. It's kind of to do that work. So so I'm excited to walk through this one with you.
Well, I'd be interested in some of those challenging ones too. But okay, so getting back to what we have here. So the first thing was to identify, and I think they had given the direction, make it objective. So when I wrote about it, I wrote in the third person. And so I won't necessarily read all of this. If you feel like we're getting too long, Michael, just kind of help me summarize it and so forth. But Justin is sitting at the dining room table. At the end of the table is pretty much covered with pieces of music manuscript paper. Justin appears to be copying music from sketch sheets onto music paper. He has to make a lot of erasures because tremor, which I have, makes it hard to get a clear copy. Occasionally he checks some written words. It's Psalm 133, the New Revised Standard Version. He writes the words first before he writes the music because the words determine the placement of the notes. Sometimes he has to rewrite a page to get optimal placement and to facilitate one page leading to another page. Occasionally he goes to the piano to check or test something. Sometimes he gets pulled into playing a longer section. The transitions take quite a bit of attention. After a couple hours work, he leaves the table and lines up the newly written pages across the piano so the piece can be played from beginning to end. This is a big moment now. First time you're going to play the piece from the start to the finish, And more changes in transitions, repetitions emerge as necessary or desirable. So there's still a few adjustments that are kind of being made. So that concluded the identify section.
So that's the first movement. And as Justin pointed out, this is a theological reflection beginning with an experience, or the other word that we sometimes throw around in EFM for that is the action source. So we're moving from the action source in the identify movement. And what comes next?
So then we go into the explore, the exploration. And I think that here they say you shift in my directions. I'm pretty sure I was told to shift from being objective to the very personal. What was it actually feeling like when you did this? What was your experience while precipitating this action? And so then I said the moment of greatest feeling was when I was trying to play the piece from beginning to end. And this is a curiously hard thing to do. I had to be able to play all these different sections. I'd composed them. And so I'd played them many times and tried this and tried that and tried the other thing. So I'd already played every section, but when I had to go directly from one section to another, it often didn't work. And so there was a feeling of frustration. There was a sense, I ought to be able to do this, guys. and I couldn't, you know. It was just kind of like, my fingers would get all stiff and it just wouldn't work.
You weren't really, I've had a sneak peek at where the reflection's going, but at that point, it doesn't really sound like you were feeling the unity of the piece, right? It still kind of felt like its component parts and a little disjointed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think very much at that point. Yeah,
Okay.
I think very much at that point. It was just like, God, let me help me get through this. You know, it was just kind of like, I'm not able to do what feels like I ought to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but as I went along, there was also a sense of the whole. There was sometimes when, you know, by one time I'd gotten from beginning to end, and maybe by the third time, I was beginning to get a sense of the whole piece. And sometimes surprising unities emerge from what you've written, from the music. Harmonies in one place will seem to echo harmonies in another place, or harmonies in one place will suggest the harmonies that are coming up, coming ahead. And those weren't things that I planned. It wasn't like, I thought it's going to be this way. They were just things that came because of the writing process, or if the connections were unconsciously created, or they were accidents. I don't know, but it was going on. It was really fun.
Yeah.
So it was really neat.
It was a spirit-filled process.
Yeah. Exactly. It was like, oh wow, there were a lot of oh wows there.
And when we were talking before, you really kind of brought out this notion that at some point there was this transition where the piece seemed to write itself or play itself in a way, right?
Yeah. I mean, you begin to get a sense for the overall piece. I mean, up till then, it was just kind of trying to get through it, trying to play it. But I got now to the point where I had a sense of the overall piece. I had a sense of the line from the beginning to the end. And then all of a sudden, there was a whole different kind of experience that came along with it. The feelings were, there was a lot of pride. There was satisfaction. There was a kind of an, oh, wow, kind of like I did something I didn't even know I did, that there was a way in which the whole had seemed to become larger than all the little pieces that I'd put into it, all the little elements that I'd put into it. So then what I was writing next was, there was a sense of being part of a larger flow. If this piece is to be part of a larger service, the experience of the whole service becomes part of this picture, and how the piece fits into that. How is this psalm going to be part of the service that it's going to fit into? And how is it going to enhance and deepen that process? And then I began to think about how long composers had been setting psalms to music, and I'm sure in my head I went back to, Baroque period. And then I think, well, of course, there'd be some in the Renaissance, and then there'd be some in the Gregorian chant, the psalms in the, in 500 and 700 AD, ADE. And then you pointed out that we now know about some very important Hebrew traditions where they sang the psalms in very, very specified and stylized ways. And those traditions went back to 300, 500, 700, 900 BC, before the Christian era.
Yeah, and sometimes when I can only speak sort of as I embody, the priesthood in any given moment and sort of standing in a long, but there are moments where that just kind of hits you like a semi truck that you're doing the same thing in this moment that forebears have been doing, not just for centuries, but for millennia. This kind of a kind of different way of looking at that cloud of witnesses.
And then there was a feeling, a real powerful feeling that came as I was sitting there and kind of being aware of the unity of the piece and the unity of the conception, and then the unity of the service, and then the unity of the whole process of setting psalms. And it was kind of like, I like having this experience. I like being in this space. I like being aware that something I'm doing right here has that kind of of tradition
Mm-hmm.
and time and spiritual temporal space behind it.
So here we can already see that we're transitioning from the explore to the connect piece and connecting what you're doing with pieces of tradition. And yeah, so good. Excellent.
And of course, that's the next thing that we get to is the connect. But before we leave it,
okay,
there was also this this little insecurity that was going on, which you've helped with. But there was I had some uncertainty about certain changes that I had made in the text. And in Psalm 133, and perhaps you can remember and quote it straight off, Michael.
How good and pleasant it is when brethren live in unity. I think it's the PCP translation.
Yeah, I know.
But you did make some, but you did make some changes there, which I thought actually kind of take us deeper into the biblical tradition behind that psalm. Because even then, you know, the intention of the psalmist in that moment is not just sort of brotherly sort of relationships, but brethren in the sense of family, which is how you translated that word.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and that was quite the point. The first line that I used was, "Look, how good and how fruitful it is the dwelling of family together, as opposed to the dwelling of brothers together."
Yeah.
And there's a little pressure involved in that because it's St. Michael's in Albuquerque. We're doing our best to take the gender emphasis out of the texts we work with, and so we do modify them. And then there was a repetition that was appropriate in the music, and so then I changed it slightly for the second time. How good and how fruitful it is the living of people in harmony was kind of the second line of that particular thing, which kind of takes it from the family and extends it outward.
The specific to the general, which has been the movement sort of all throughout the conversation, right? You were talking from the very beginning about working on specific pieces and moving from there to moving to the unity of the whole piece, and then moving from there to the unity within the service. And so there's this sort of constant movement from the specific to the wider general. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that sense of space is one of the things that was really thrilling about this particular phase of the reflection, because, you know, we're getting all the way from do, you know, from a very, very finite set of notes to a sense of huge sense of the tradition that's going on around this, you know, and from the sense of the family to the sense of people living in harmony and so forth as well, you know, and that has applications to our lives today, you know, and living in harmony. So anyway, then.
So I think the connections with tradition are good, but you made a really good connection within the culture source. When you talked to me earlier about, you mentioned Buddhism. Maybe you want to speak to that a little bit now.
Yes. Well, actually, that was kind of more of the connect part, which I have. We've talked about, but I haven't gotten to. Okay, yeah. So you're quite right that what I had written there was there's unity in the piece, unity in the service, unity around the process of setting songs to music, and hopefully a unity about people playing, singing, and hearing the music. And then this seems to connect with Buddhist ideas about the unity of all things. And that was just something that kind of came to me, and I'm sure, you know, I've had some exposure to Buddhism. Our former pastor, Reverend Brian Taylor, was a Buddhist meditator, and so Buddhism was very important influence for him. And so I'm sure that some of that had to do with it, but that those ideas were coming to me. But it seems that that idea that there's unity in all things, and with meditation, there's unity with God and with the universe, and all of these kinds of things were just sort of part of that whole experience.
Yeah, and I think that Buddhist value of unity with all things is also and I don't think necessarily that it's even that Paul was even necessarily trying to be unique in that moment, but it really does kind of play really well together with the notion of sort of the unity of the body of Christ, and that unity is different from uniformity, right? That unity is that we each sort of maintain our personhood, our individuality, our charisms, but that there's still this unity of purpose and unity of yeah. So
no, quite. All of that resonates for me, and it makes sense in terms of thinking and feeling. And so then the final step was the application. And so what do you do with this realization? And at that point, it was the beginning of the COVID shutdown. And so I was living with my wife, and we also had my stepson and my stepdaughter-in-law, who was pregnant with our first grandchild, and they were living with us at the time. So the dwelling of family together had a particular resonance right in my own life at that moment. Interestingly, I hadn't really noticed that when I started to set it.
Huh. Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That this setting, this was a song
that there was something about that process which brought that forward for you in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, then it was kind of like there's a fundamental unity about all things. I commit to my home and family during this quarantine. I commit to bringing a sense of unity to this experience of living with them together at this time when none of us can just go out and spend time with our friends. We all have to make things work together, and we all have to make room for the other person's eccentricities. We all have to get along. At one point, Hannah, my stepdaughter-in-law, said that she was feeling early in pregnancy, you can feel extremely emotional. And so she said, I may start crying, but don't take it personally. It won't be something you said. It'll be some way that I took it, which was wonderful for her to make that observation. But part of the point was that it wasn't easy to have this unity. And yet there was simply a unity that was there. And then the final observation was that unity is kind of in front of my face all the time, but I very seldom am aware of it. And right then, I was aware of it in a very intense way, in a way that one would think you would never forget. And yet, I can't say that I thought about it today. And I knew we were going to do this conversation. So the unity, I think when the Buddhists say, remember, unity is part of everything, I think that's a very perceptive and valid dictum, and something that we all would do well to keep as part of our spiritual lives.
And that's a really good example of the fourth source. So I think we've done, started in the action source. We've drawn heavily from tradition with Psalm 133, culture from the Buddhism sort of informing the culture source. And then there are some values at stake here. And so, this Buddhist value of unity is important to you. And the way that you just articulated that is a very fine position statement. And that's that fourth source. So
well, that's kind of wonderful. I didn't realize that we also had all four of those. Those things going on at the same time too. Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Justin, for doing this theological reflection in a new format with me today. And I'm going to make sure that the link to your music is in the comments under this video. And so if you'd like to see Justin's piece, I would certainly invite you to. It's a lovely setting of Psalm 133. Anything else you want to say before we close?
Well, just thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. And it's been a pleasure, Michael, discussing this with you, because I think I thought I'd kind of milked it for everything that was in there. But in our discussion, I realized that there were a lot of other things that were in there too. And so that's been very exciting. That's been part of it. And
I'm glad.
just one little promotional note. If anyone hearing the music would like to perform it, I am always glad to have my music performed in other settings and by other people. And so if they want to get in touch with me, I would be happy to facilitate other people performing the song.
Thank you, Justin.
And thank you, Michael. It's been a great pleasure.